Okay, good evening and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So we are here, myself and Kwame, for our weekly, every Tuesday and Thursday session. For today, our topic is what IMF wants in Africa. So we will go that in the show. What's happening? Just a second. Yeah, so a bit of something was open. We will talk about that in detail, meaning from the historical background and then its relation to Africa. Of course, that's what concerns us. And then also we will relate it to Janet Yellen's visit from the US. I think it happened in this year in February. So to analyze that, our brother Kwame Gonza is here. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you so much, Mahlet. Thank you for having me. Greetings to everyone who's watching. It is another day. We were here last week on Thursday.
Yeah.
We are very excited to be here, and we are glad that you are out there watching us, on Connect Africa, on the platform, which was founded, by our very own Mahlet here. And Mahlet, I thank you very much for the great work also you are doing, for the African people in general. So if you are out there and you are watching, or it is your first time to watch here, you need to subscribe to the channel and help us to grow, because we are doing the work on the ground. We are not only talking about these things here, but we are also on the ground in the struggle to unify and make our quota to unify the African continent, because we have to make our contribution in this generation. The gone generation of the independence in the 60s, they did their quota, they contributed. And so also we must contribute. You can see China, that the generation of the independence came in 1949 in China. Another generation came, in the 70s and 80s, and they built their China. Another generation of the Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping, they are continuing the tradition of strengthening China. But somehow Africa backslid a little bit when we failed to consolidate our independence. So that contribution must be done by each all of us, each and all of us. Okay, each one and all of us, we must make that contribution. So where our ancestors stopped, the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Haile Selassies, and even though we backslid, but we must not lose, touch with that mission that was started. And this is called normally by Samia Nkrumah, who is a daughter to the late president, Kwame Nkrumah. She normally calls it the unfinished business. There's a lot of unfinished business. So the unfinished business is the unification of that continent. We are making our contribution. So we are here on the platform on Connect Africa. Everything we are saying is towards the contribution of unifying the African continent and making it strong, and having the African people gain their dignity and respect, which they deserve, all across the globe and on the international stage, for that matter. That is what we are talking about. So we are not only making these analyses on this platform, but we are also doing the work. That is why we are calling for your support in any way, all ways you can contribute, to our efforts that we are putting out there. Come in and contribute. So I want to thank you, Mahlet. As you said rightly, today we are going to talk about the IMF. How has the IMF been able to come back, strongly? We have been hearing they are going to give loans to Ghana. They are trying to give loans to Egypt. Egypt sometimes was refusing, their arm twisting. And then we saw Tunisia. Tunisia was trying to seek a loan also from IMF and looked at the conditions. And Tunisia also was trying to reject, a few, I think it was last week, Tunisia was trying to reject that loan and saying instead it would join the BRICS. so that it can get loan from the BRICS Bank, which is headquartered in Shanghai. So all these events that are happening, and the IMF, we see it coming back strongly, or on the African continent. What does it mean? What does it really mean? From our African perspective. So we will look at the IMF, what it is as an institution, and then we would look at our great people, like Kwame Nkrumah. What have they said about the IMF? What have they said about the IMF? What is the share of the Western world's percentage? What is the percentage share of our debt which we have? We have been hearing about China here, China there, China debt trap with Africa. What exactly is the truth? So this is what we want to reveal today. This is what we want you to understand today. So we want you to get prepared, buckle up, because what is coming is a hurricane, is a storm that we are going to reveal. So I want to thank you very much, Mahlet, as we prepare, with our audience. Greetings to everyone.
Thank you indeed, Kwame. Yeah, so as we always say, we are not here for a click and bait. It's for education, to bring information and to give it an African perspective, what's happening in Africa and also what's happening in globally, because we are part of the world, and give it a Pan-African perspective and see it from the African angle, and then bring that knowledge, historical background, and what's happening, and then way forward. And as Kwame said, we do groundworks. As we said, there are petitions to be signed, and then also we do write letters also to organizations that concern them, like African Union and others, when there needs to be. We have one upcoming one, so probably we will share it when it is ready. If you are representing any organization or anything, so you can be a signatory. Now, without further ado, let's go to the questions. As we said, the topic is what IMF wants in Africa. As we always do, first it's good to get that historical background. So I ask you, Kwame, give us that, briefly, why IMF was established, and how is it capitalized, and also what it is doing. I mean, we know that they say, for example, with regards to its role in Africa, it says its role is to help Africa, meaning all state members in Africa, to promote trade by establishing a sound macroeconomic framework. Because why macroeconomic? Because it's a key precondition for trade growth, and then by stabilizing low inflation and financial stability. But is that really what IMF doing in Africa? Because it seems, as we observe it, as we see it, it seems quite the opposite what it does. So I'm not going to go in detail. Over to you, Kwame. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahlet. Mahlet, I'm going to ask you to share. I have a PowerPoint which I want our people to see. So it will give me guidance, in what I want to present to the people. So please share for me that screen, and let me see what to do from there. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You have done indeed well. So the IMF, just taking on straight what the question is, what exactly is the IMF? The IMF, on paper, is an institution that was established alongside, of course, the World Bank. The IMF is supposed to be a macro, economic institution, an institution for stabilizing macroeconomics. So by that, I mean that this institution is supposed to help countries which are in financial distress, whose economies are unstable. So whether that has been, fulfilled That is on paper, like I said, that is on paper, because there is what is on paper, and then there's what is the reality. So whether that mission of macroeconomic stability was or has been fulfilled is what we want to examine as we go forward. So and we will talk about briefly people like John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, who wrote that book called the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John Perkins was working with these organizations, the World Bank and IMF, and then the other corporations, of course, which are surrounding this IMF so-called organization. So let us kick it off and go forward. So we want to start with a short video, just 1 minute, and that short video will try to explain to us from a layman's perspective what the IMF is and how it is different from the World Bank, and then I'll come back after that short video. So let's get into it.
The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been founded, just like the United Nations after World War II.
Kwame, we are not hearing the video. It stopped. I cannot hear you also.
Okay, sorry. Let me reshare this so that we can get the sound. Let me.
Yeah. Okay, it seems that I think he will come back, Kwame. So those of you who are here, I kindly ask you, please share the link with your network. That will be good if we can do that. Here is Kwame.
Oh, sorry, guys. Let me reshare this.
Okay.
So that we can be able to have access to the sound. So my apologies over there, but we will have the sound shortly. Let me see. All right. Let me see. Okay. So let me see the share here. So we ask our audience to bear with us a little bit. We are coming. Yes, we are coming. They should bear with us a little bit. We are coming. So we want to make sure the sound is right. Mahlet, can you see it?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. It is coming. It is doing the processing here. It's doing the processing. All right. I think there it is. Yes. So you can share it.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. Okay. So what we were saying is that we wanted to examine what IMF as an institution is from a layman's language in less than 1 minute. Okay. Let me see. All right. Let me see. Wow. Um, Mahlet, can you see it? Okay,
I share
so
it. Yeah.
can you hear the
The
video, the
International
audio?
Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been found.
Can you hear the audio?
Yes, but it just stopped, I heard it,
Just
but
like
it
the United
stopped.
Nations after World War II. Why?
Is it clear?
Yeah,
Is the audio clear? Okay.
yeah.
All right then. So let me go back a little bit. Then we'll start.
The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been founded, just like the United Nations after World War II. Why? Mainly because after the war, everyone wanted peace. However, peace on an empty stomach is hard to maintain. So these two institutions were meant to help the economic stability of the world. Both of them are basically banks, but instead of being started by individuals like regular banks, they've been started by countries. Most of the world's countries are members of the two institutions, but of course, the richest countries are those who handled most of the financing, and ultimately, those who have the greatest influence. The IMF and the World Bank were designed to complement each other. The IMF's main goal is helping countries which are currently in trouble and who cannot get money by other means. Perhaps their economy collapsed, perhaps their currency is in danger. The IMF, in these cases, is kind of like a lender of last resort, who you go to when nobody else is willing to give you money. The World Bank, in comparison, has a more long-term approach. Its main goals revolve around the eradication of poverty, and it funds specific projects which help them reach these goals, especially in poor countries. Unfortunately, the reputation of these institutions has been dwindling, mainly due to practices such as lending to corrupt governments or even dictators and imposing ineffective austerity measures to get their money back. If run properly, however, they definitely could help make the world a better place.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I hope you had that. You've seen that short video, which is trying to explain what the World Bank is. So the World Bank as an institution, I mean, what the IMF is. I mean, the IMF as an institution is an institution which is responsible for macroeconomic stability, like what we have said, and it lends to nations. It is a group. It is an institution that was started by a group of countries that came together after World War II. As you rightly know, that the institutions which were formed after World War II, when you're talking about the World Bank, IMF, and the United Nations, Africa was not on the table because during that period, the global South, majority of the world was under colonialism, the brutal colonialism of the West. So majority of them, they were not there. So even when you see today that the IMF, to a certain level, like the gentleman rightly mentioned in the video, that to a certain extent, people have come to hate the institutions. Why? Because they were transformed into institutions of vehicles for colonialism instead of helping the world, as we are going to continue to see in our presentation. And so the United States, as you can see, Japan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and these are the leading countries who are putting money in there, and China, who has arrived on the scene more recently because of its economic growth. So what happens there is that countries have votes. Like you can see, the United States is the one with the biggest number of votes. Even though there is 100% votes, the United States, with 5% of the global population, has more than 16.5% of the votes. So this is the influence. So this means that the United States has oversized influence in this particular institution, together with its colonial allies. And people talk about Japan. I think the other thing which people don't know about Japan is that Japan also is a colonial country. It went and colonized China. That is why you see that China and Japan, they have that friction even up to now. They have that unfinished business. And that is why Japan fears China very much, because it fears that retaliation that China in one way or the other may come and retaliate against Japan because of what Japan went and did to China, to the extent that even it helped to separate off Taiwan from China. It went and colonized and killed a lot of people. So Japan also has a big influence in the World Bank. So the more powerful you are economically, is the more influence you have at the IMF. And it is unfortunate even that countries like India, for example, which you are seeing, India also has considerable influence, because it has about 2.64% vote share, at the IMF, India. And yet the aggregated economy of the African continent right now is bigger than that of India. India is around 3.1, I think it is around 3.17 trillion, and Africa is up to 3.4 to 3.5 trillion. So Africa also could have been at this table, to make major decisions and contributions. You can see Brazil is there. You can see Russia is there. Small countries like Italy, they are there. Even they have more say than how you can see what Africa is contributing. So Africa has been left as a beggar in this institution, because we have not yet achieved the power, the level of power that Nkrumah envisioned for us, or what our forefathers envisioned for us and said, let us unify so that we can aggregate our economies. And when we aggregate our economies, we'll get even respect, from all these institutions, World Bank, IMF, UN. We will get respect from them. But because we have still a group of people who don't understand the power of unity, the advantages of coming together as Africans, then that is why Africa has continued to be in the position where it is, that it is being bullied, it is being occupied with military bases, with the force. They occupy the continent even without our knowledge. But I don't want to go very much deep into that. So what we are saying is that the IMF, unlike the World Bank, which sponsors various projects. For example, you can see that if you go to various African countries, you will see that there's a road, there's a hospital, and you will see it is written the World Bank, sponsored by the World Bank, or funded by World Bank. The IMF doesn't do that. So while the World Bank is on the micro economic level within countries, the IMF is on the level of the national level. It doesn't deal with internal issues, but it rather deals with the whole economy. They come to your country when you have failed. Understand that the moment you see IMF has come to you, most of the times actually it is our leaders who go to them that they want help. The moment you see them, it means that they don't have anywhere else to borrow, because there's a couple of spaces where to borrow money from. They borrow money on the international market from private investors. They can borrow money from nations, individual nations. But when you see that the economy is not doing well, and they have failed to go to the international market to borrow money, and they can't borrow money from states, then the IMF comes in. The IMF is the last resort lender. And the reason why it has been twisting the arm of the global south, and especially African countries which are poor, and taking our resources, they come to your country and say, what do you have as resources? They connive up, okay? They connive up with other, companies, major Western corporations, because the West is the one which is leading in putting money in this institution. So they send their corporations to extract mineral resources, because you have failed as a leader to take care of your own people, and you have failed to capitalize on these resources. on one side. That is on one side. On the other side also, sometimes they use force. They can come if you have a lot of resources and you were planning for them very well. They can come and talk to you. If they talk to you and you refuse, then they overthrow you and put someone they will be able to deal with. So that is the second scenario. And they work together, of course, with the colonialist power. So from a Pan-African perspective, you can say that the IMF actually is a colonial institution, which is there to continue the process of colonization from direct, colonization. This is indirect colonization, which Nkrumah called neo-colonialism. So it is a continuation of the old colonialism, which Britain used to use a lot of force and come and take the resources by force through colonization, direct colonization. Now the United States and its allies, now they gang up and put money into this institution, and then they come and colonize indirectly. So this is what the IMF is about from the studies that we have seen. And so you see that being done, from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, when the African countries had just gotten independence. And so they came in to claim that they are giving advice to the African people on what to do with their economies. So briefly, that is what the IMF is about. Thank you so much, Mahlet.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for that. It was a needed historical background we need, to understand what's happening currently. Now, moving to our second talking point, which is the debt that Africa owes to IMF or to others, and versus China, because as you said, rightly said in the beginning, we hear a lot of China from the Western world, blaming China. Actually, the Janet Yellen, when she was visiting Zambia a couple of months ago, she called out China, saying that it is a barrier, for debt restructuring in Africa, which is, as you know, all Zambia is a major copper producer, not only in Africa but globally. Now, is it what we hear in the mainstream? Because most of the things is because our ignorance, that we don't research, we don't go and read. Most of the things quite the contrary of what the mainstream feed us. So is that really what the actual numbers shows, that with regards to date, China versus IMF? If you can just fly us to that, and let's hear really what is the real information.
Okay, thank you so much, Mahlet, once again. So this will take me direct to the share of Africa's debt, or how it is being shared among us, whether you're talking about the international lending bodies or companies or corporations which are buying into, when, for example, we raise bonds, we raise money through issuing bonds on the international market, whether it is the nations themselves and whether it is the multilateral institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and then the other institutions, of course, like BRICS Bank, which is being created in Shanghai, and all the other possible institutions where we are likely to borrow from, like China and its private companies. So when you look at the debt of the continent, actually, the ownership of this debt is being led by the IMF. Like I mentioned, starting with the 1960s, the IMF had become very strong because the United States was in a very good position economically. That is why you see that the IMF was very strong, extremely strong. And Nkrumah was warning us about these institutions, how they are coming. And even Nkrumah went to the extent of writing a full book about the mechanism of neocolonialism. The book is called Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. And we will see it further as we are going into the presentation. So Nkrumah warned us about these institutions, how they are coming. This did not mean that Nkrumah did not go in to borrow. He went in to borrow money, but at the same time, Nkrumah saw that this is dangerous, that we are doing. Why is it dangerous? Because it is enslaving, our people. It is enslaving our people. And then he proffered a solution, and the only solution was unifying Africa, making it stronger, like we are saying right now, and integrate our economies, integrate our GDP. It is on very few occasions that you hear India has gone to the IMF to borrow. Why? And yet our economy as Africans is slightly bigger than that of India. Why? It's because we are still disintegrated. So Nkrumah warned us about this. Now, the debt started exploding after the leaders of the independence generation were overthrown. And then they destroyed the industries, because the IMF's purpose, the Western world's purpose, like we have mentioned consistently, was to have control over two things on the African continent. Number one was the material resources of the African continent. Number two, the control over the markets. The control over the markets of the African continent, it means having control over the population of Africa. Doing things like social engineering so that the Africans will be able to like products which come from the West. And then you take their materials, you take it to Paris, London, everywhere, Britain and the United States and all over Europe, make these products from their own materials and bring it back, advertise to them, and then show them that European products are superior. So that is what it means to have control over the markets and material resources. This Nkrumah wrote about it in his book, Africa Must Unite. And it is a repeated theme. He repeated it even in majority of his books, even when you are talking about consensusism, even when you are talking about neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. The two major reasons they came here was the material and markets. Even before colonialism, when they came with slavery, these are the things which they came here. So they would not allow, they could not afford to allow Africa to industrialize, because the moment you industrialize the African continent, it means you have taken the material forces, the material resources from them. Then Africa is going to manufacture its own aircraft. Africa is going to manufacture its own automobile cars. It's going to manufacture its own televisions. It's going to manufacture its own electronics, lights, bulbs, irons, and whatever electronics, all the electronics, phones, radios, all these semiconductors. And that means the West would stop growing. So it was necessary to use institutions like the IMF to come to Africa and then tell them that the only way for the continent to develop is to privatize everything. Privatize everything. And it is unfortunate that even some of the most educated people on the African continent were not able to figure this out. And that is actually after they have overthrown the independence generation, majority of the independence generation who were resisting, if you go back. So the people who came after them, majority of them, of course, were educated in the West, and they were taught that the only way to develop is the way which the white man tells you, the Western world. And I'm trying to emphasize this because the institutions of the West, they are integrated in their government. They are integrated, the financial, the military, and the governing systems and businesses. They are integrated together. They work together as a giant machine. And that giant machine goes out to the world to exploit the world. So if you do not take care of yourself, if you do not think for yourself, then they will think for you. They will force for you to think like them, as we have seen on numerous cases. So they came, destroyed the industries, and they started saying that the only way to develop is to privatize everything. And even up to now, we hear people saying, have bought into this falsehood, this false narrative. You can go all across the African continent. But privatization is not the only way to develop, but rather a mixed economy, what we call a mixed economy. And this is what all of them have done. Even the United States, it used state and private capital. When you go to Singapore, which is normally brought up as an example when you are talking about Africa and Singapore also, it used the state and private capital. South Korea is the same. China is is the biggest example. Britain itself, it was run, and France, it was run on state and private. So it was a mixed economy. But in Africa, when you come, they are always telling us the only way to do it is through privatization. So they sold all our industries. When you go to Nigeria, if you read a book which was written about Dangote, the richest black man in the world, you can see the writers try to examine what happened in Nigeria during that period of privatization, that industries which were going to help the country were privatized off, were destroyed, sold to individuals, and some of them, they did not have any interest in running these industries. Even some of the foreigners who bought them, the justice, abandoned them, and they got spoiled. This was the strategy of the West, to destroy all the industries so that the industries in Africa could not compete. And this, we can even see it today with what is happening with China, that they are trying to fight against Chinese industrialization. So Africa's industrialization was fought against even before getting off the ground. So they came in, they say, if you sell it, we give you money so that you can be able to, to pay the civil servants. And so that's when Africa's debt started exploding, up to the extent where we are today. Like, according to 2021 data, our debt to GDP, our debt to the whole Africa's debt, owed to all the lenders across the globe, is around $645 billion. 645, close to $650 billion dollars. That is the total. Now we want to break down this and look at how much do we owe the West and how much do we owe China. Mahlet asked me a question. We have seen the talk, the China debt trap, the China debt trap, the China debt trap. This has been repeated on numerous, occasions. Now we want to see how much does China share of the debt which Africa is owing to everyone else across the globe. Of the 650 billion, how much does China, what is the percentage that China has? But we will first see what is the West, what is the share of the West. Now, when you are talking about the West, the share of the West, when you filter out the information of China, the debt which Africa owes the West is $560 billion, $560.73 billion. That is out of the 650 billion. Africa owes the West, combined, the governments, the IMF, because the IMF has been the leader, and the World Bank, they have been the leader in this enterprise of extracting, interest through these loans. The IMF has been the leader, and we have had even people like Dr. Chombori complain about this and say, Africa, when it is given loans, it is given at a higher interest rate of 7 to 9%. The United States, which already has money and is already rich, when it goes to the IMF, And of course, it is the one which is leading in putting money in this bank. It puts almost annually up to $80 billion in the up to 80 to $90 billion. So when the United States goes to borrow, it is given 4% interest rate, which doesn't make sense in the in the real world, because they already have money. Why would they get a lower interest rate, and the poor people who don't have money, they get higher interest rate? They are burdened with higher interest rates. And that is what it means by neocolonialism. That is what it means that you are being colonized, that you are colonies of these people, because they started these institutions. It is their policy that you should pay this, you should continue to be enslaved. So the share of debt which the West has of the total debt of Africa is 560.73, and that translates to 77%. They own 77% of Africa's debt. That is the West. 77% of Africa's debt. That is $560.73 billion. They own 77% of Africa's debt. When we go to China, China's share of Africa's debt is $84.12 billion. The West is 560 billion. China is 800. China is $84 billion. Now, when you convert China's percentage, it translates to 13%. The West, it is 77%. China, it is 13%. So, looking at the real data which we are presenting to you today, with the source which is there that you can go yourself and find out from the International Debt Statistics database, it is evident that China is not the one which is burdening Africa with the debt, because China's share of Africa's debt is only 13%. The Western share of Africa's debt is 77%. But they are not talking about their burdening of Africa with debt. They are talking about China. Why? Because we know that China, its debt has been more productive on the African continent. More productive, of course, to the Chinese, but also a little bit more productive for us compared. It is not as productive as we would have wished it to be, but it is productive compared to the West. With all this debt that has been, they have burdened Africa with, the Western world, we do not see any fruit of what they have been doing on the African continent. And yet China with 84 billion. And now I want you to differentiate debt from trade, because China's trade figures are much higher than the West. China's trade figure with Africa are around $265 billion and clocking to $300 billion. And the West, even though China has been around with Africa for at least 30 years cooperating with Africa, 30 to 40 years cooperating with Africa. And the West is trade with Africa. When you look at countries like the United States, even though the United States' economy is bigger than China, its trade with Africa is just $55 billion. $55 billion. So it is unfortunate that they don't want to trade with Africa. They want to use Africa as an exploitation ground, give huge debts, burden them with their debts, and take away their resources. Take our resources. So the trap in Africa is that, the trap they have been using on Africa is that they use this huge debt to take our resources for free. And China comes and capitalizes on this mistake and blends the two and uses its debt, of course, to its benefit, but better than them, and then mixes it with the trade and builds a lot of infrastructure. Hence, China's built infrastructure in Africa. For example, if you single out like roads, China has built more roads in the last 30 years in Africa, more than the Western world combined in the last 600 years. So I want that to sink in. So that is the IMF. That is the IMF and what it is doing on the African continent. That is what the IMF is doing on the African continent. Now, let us look at what people like Kwame Nkrumah said about the IMF. What did Nkrumah say about the IMF, during his time when he was the president? Because he published a lot of literature, and he even went ahead to publish a book called Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, which was published in 1965. So what did Nkrumah say about the IMF? Nkrumah said that still another neo-colonialist trap on the economic front has come to be known as multilateral aid through international organizations. International organizations like the International Monetary Fund, that is the IMF, which we are talking about. Nkrumah is he's saying this in 1965. So he said the International Monetary Fund, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, known as the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation and the International Development Association are all examples that are significantly having US capital as their major backing. And we have seen that. We have seen from the data, the information 2018 data, that the United States is the major contributor. And the United States is the one who's the flag bearer right now, the leader of the colonialists right now all across the globe, going everywhere, bombing and destroying countries. And this is what Nkrumah is seeing, that all of them, all significantly having US capital as their major bank. All these banks, whether you're talking about IMF, whether you're talking about World Bank, they are having their backing from the United States capital. And he said that these agencies have the habit of forcing world B borrowers to submit. These agencies, they have the habit of forcing the would-be borrowers to submit to various offensive conditions, such as supplying information about their economies, submitting their policy plans, to review by the World Bank, and accepting agency supervision of their use of loans. As for the alleged development between 1960, now Nkrumah was quoting during the time of his existence, between 1960 and mid-1963, the International Development Association promised a total of $500 million to applicants, of which only 70 million was actually received. Now, we have seen this scenario also on numerous cases that they promise, the Western world promises a lot of things that are going to happen. Like even right now, they are promising with their, hopping around the African continent like a plague, that they are going to help Africa. We are all in. This is the word they are using. We are all in on Africa. When you listen to Biden, when you listen to Kamala Harris, the vice president, this is what they have been saying. When you listen to the president of the United States, we are all in on Africa. When you listen to the US-Africa summit, Janet Yellen, when she came in, they are repeating the same lies. We are all in on Africa. And so we are going to invest, we are going to work with Africa. But when you look at the pledges that were made during the US-Africa summit, during the Obama era, they did not come through. The money that was pledged did not come through. The trade did not increase between the United States and Africa. And they made another pledge and promises at the just ended US Africa Summit, which happened last year, at the end of last year in the United States. And those pledges, I can guarantee you that they are not going to come through. So this is what Nkrumah is talking about, that they promised, and they promised $500 million and only 70. Imagine, only 70 of the promises came out. So this is the nature of the World Bank. So when you see them going across the globe and across the African continent, they want free things. They want Africa's resources for free. When you see them going to Zambia, because they want the copper, they want to extract the copper for free and go and feed their industry. It takes us back to what we mentioned, the extraction of material resources, the control over material resources and the markets. So this is what Nkrumah was saying. What did Nkrumah add? Nkrumah said, Nkrumah is writing this in 1965. Increased Chinese activity was responsible to some extent for the larger amount of debt offered in 1964. Though China contributed only a quarter of total aid committed, the Soviet Union provided a half, and the East European countries a quarter. Although aid from socialist countries, now he was talking about here the Soviet Union, which is the current Russia, and China. Although these countries still, their aid falls far short, that offered from the West, it is often more impressive, since it is swift and flexible, and interest rates on communist loans or socialist loans, and he's talking about, again, China and Russia, their loans are only about 2%. The interest rate on their loans is only about 2%, compared with 5 to 60% on loans from the Western countries. So for the Western countries and their IMF and World Bank, the IMF and World Bank is a business for extracting gain, not helping, even though on paper they paint it as an institution that is responsible for helping, because they say it is helping to stabilize the world economy. It is an institution for continuing the domination of the global South, extract resources out of it, and control the markets, and continue to spread what they call European values, our way of life. We made a program about this. Our way of life. What is that? Our way of life is the continued economic domination and colonial policy. Dominate the people and continue to extract resources which you used to extract during slavery and colonialism. That is the policy. So Nkrumah is writing this. Imagine, that is why they say Kwame Nkrumah, he never dies, because he was so ahead of his time. He saw these problems firsthand in the 60s. And then he gave us the solutions. He gave us the solutions that we should be following, what we should be doing. And we need to pay very close attention to those solutions which Nkrumah gave to us. So why are the loans from Russia and China impressive? Nkrumah mentioned, of course, that they have low interest rate of 1 to 2%. And the Western world, instead of, they have the major money, the biggest money, they give the biggest loans, but these biggest loans, actually, again, they have the biggest interest. It doesn't make sense. And we have seen the data. We have seen the data that the data is just confirming what Nkrumah is saying, in the 1960s, in 1965. The data of 2018 is saying that the West, we owe the West, we Africans, we owe the West $560 billion. $560 billion. Meaning that their debt is bigger. If I go back a little bit to what Nkrumah was saying, that even though aid from China and Russia still falls far short, you look at the word he used. He said far short of that. So far short, what he means is that when you look at the data from 2018, China's debt in Africa, when you look at data from 2021, China's debt in Africa is just $84 billion. But Nkrumah said that their loans are often more impressive and swift and flexible, and their interest rates are lower. So you see that you will get more benefit from China's $84 billion than someone who has given you $560 billion. And this is a reality which majority of the African leaders have failed to face. They are fearful of facing this reality and dealing with it once and for all, so that Africa also can rise from the ashes where we are right now. And so we see that we see that countries like Russia comes out in broad daylight and say, we have forgiven the debt. $20 billion. You will never hear the West mention these kind of numbers. Russia forgave, this is March 2023. Russia forgave Africa $20 billion of debt. Russia has written off Africa's debt amounting to more than $20 billion. Did you hear any African leader come out and appreciate Russia for this gesture? But the West does not forgive that. It extracts even blood out of the people. If it means causing war so that they will take the resources because of the debt which we have, they will cause a war and kill 1 million people and extract the resources and take it. They will extract the sweat and the blood. So these are the conditions which Nkrumah is talking about, that they give you unbearable conditions. They supervise your economy. Russia has never come here to supervise our economies. And they don't forgive that. Even though they have been saying that China is standing in the way of restructuring. Why? This is a trap. This is a trap. And the Africans have to be careful and pay close attention to this trap. China has waived the debt of some African countries. Okay? This is August 2022. Have you ever seen the West that it has waived the debt? If you hear that the West has waived the debt, you hear 100 million. But mind you, they have the biggest debt. They own the biggest debt of Africa. They own Africa's biggest debt. But how can you say I've forgiven you for $100 million? How significant is that compared to $560 billion? So I need people to think about this. So with that, I hope Mahlet have been able to answer your question.
Very much indeed, really. I loved it. I was in class, as I say, as I always say, and I'm sure our viewers here are taking notes and lessons. It's like 101 about IMF and Africa. Now, we have repeatedly said, the world is changing. The world is changing. There is so much regrouping, it's not only that unipolar world has gone long time ago, but I don't know if they admit it. But with that coming is Africa looking at any options, the way it relates itself with IMF. Is it doing anything? Also, maybe Janet Yellen's visit has to do with this. Why she was here? Actually, was there any change? Was there anything substantial that she brought with? Yeah.
Yeah. So Janet Yellen, who is the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, of course, what she came here to do, we all know, was not anything beneficial to Africa. or to strike a win-win relationship. It was not the case. That is why you saw her going to places like South Africa and probably Zambia. I don't know whether she went to Zambia, but I heard she went to South Africa. And what she wants is to continue this policy of domination, as we have seen that the IMF enjoys, financing, majority of the financing, which comes from the United States. And let us go back to 2020. 2020, the United States, starting 2020 up to now, has printed more than $8 trillion. And this is the money which they are putting in the IMF and blackmailing Africans with this kind of money. Because, to be honest, when you go around our countries on the African continent, you will actually realize that majority of the people, they don't know. There's a lot of people in government who don't know these things,
Yeah.
that they don't know even what they are doing. You will be surprised. And that is why some of them, they cannot even put up a fight to defend the African continent. That is to answer your question, that is there anything that Africa is doing? So for Janet Yellen, the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, what she came here to do is to continue that policy of dispensing out the fake money, which is just printed by the United States, and take Africa's resources. That is it. Now they see, even though they have 77% of Africa's debt, they see that they need, because of their greed, they see that they need to take even the 13% which China has. You see? So they want Africans, they want China to say, I have cancelled my debt, so that Africans will not pay their debt to China and create the space to pay the Western debts. That is what they want to achieve. And so that is what you are seeing Janet Yellen doing on the African continent, and all the other United States diplomats. Number two is the rejection of the dollar. They are trying to find where they can dispense the dollars, because the dollars are being rejected everywhere. In Saudi Arabia, where India is transacting in its own currency, BRICS has set up its own bank and said they are not going to transact in dollars. Various countries, Russia has discarded the dollar. So they don't have now the dollar. Everyone is avoiding it. Brazil and China have struck up a relationship and said we are going to trade. Russia and Iran, everyone is avoiding the dollar. So they are finding where to put these dollars which they have printed, because if they don't find where to put them, then inflation is looming in their country. Inflation is going to eat them up, because these dollars are going to come back. They are being rejected, and you have printed them majority. You have printed them like water out there. So they have to come back now, because people don't want them now. They are rejecting them. So inflation is looming in the United States. And so they are trying to fight. And so that's why you see that they are fighting in Ukraine. To distract their people at home, that they are fighting for some noble cause across the globe. And so sometimes they find naive people on our continent, and they buy into it, and they take they take the bait. And so this is what she's here on the African continent to do. So with that being answered, I'll come back with the last issue way forward for us as Africans, where I think that we should be going the direction which we should be taking as African people. Thank you so much, Mahlet.
Thank you, Kwame. There's one thing that I don't understand is, it's visible that, that 13%, debt of the total debt that Africa owes. Africa has, from external loaners. It's only 30% from China. But with that, there's an obvious concrete change that the member states have seen, and the people, the citizens as well. And on the contrary, the 77% from the West or IMF, mainly, and World Bank, there's nothing concrete. I mean, compared to China, okay? Then why is it that our leaders keep on going to IMF rather than China? Is it because China's lending ability is less? Why?
So the leaders is, there's one thing which I mentioned, that in some cases, if you don't agree and you fight against them, they overthrow you. And this is written even by John Perkins in the book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, because John Perkins used to work directly with the World Bank and IMF. And so he used to go out there to arm twist governments. So if they convince you and you refuse, they come and overthrow you and bring someone who will, agree to these terms. That is one way of doing it. Number two, we said some of the people are ignorant. Some of the people, there's a book which was written by Carter G. Woodson, which is called The Miseducation of the Negro. So some of our people are miseducated. They are educated in the Western system. They are from Harvard. So they tell them that the only way to work out is IMF. When you look at presidents, for example, like of the president of Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara, he used to work with the IMF. So expect that these people are going to implement these things, because he was helped by these people, these Western people, to come to power. So he has to implement what they tell him. So this is the tragedy that we have now. So on the other side also, China has a lot of responsibility. So it may not be able to lend up to this extent, even though its lending has been increasing. In the short term, actually China is lending more. In the short term, is lending more to Africa, because these $560 billion that the West that we owe the West has been accumulating over a period of time. It has been accumulating over a long period of time. So in the short run, actually, why African leaders have been going to China, and actually why people like Janet Yellen are coming, and the whole Western diplomats are coming to the African continent to, to try to demonize China on the African continent, is because in the short run, the lending that China has been doing has been overtaking them. Like annually, if you look at annually what China has been giving, it has been greater than them in this period. So this has created the fear in the West that the IMF is going to die. The IMF, our system is going to die if we do not continue to exploit Africa and the global South, if we do not have a bank which is going to continue the exploitation. And so that is why you are seeing that the IMF now is coming back in a major way. Yet the past few years, 5 to 10 years, the king of lending has been China here. It has been financing infrastructure here, over there, here, over there, okay, through its means. So it has created that hysteria in the West. So they say we have to survive. We have to exploit these people in order for us to survive. If we don't exploit them, we cannot survive. We are not going to survive. So that's why you see that they are coming back in a major way. So to answer your question, we have issues as Africans. Some of our people are educated in the West. Some of them are intimidated to do the bidding. And of course, some of them are outright selfish. That is plain. Some of them are outright selfish, that they want to take care of their own interests and they don't care about the general public. They don't care about the African continent. That is why you see a lot of the leaders, they just don't even, some of them, they don't even outright talk about African unity, the union of Africa, the aggregation of Africa's economy into the fifth largest economy. Because when you look at Africa, we are the fifth largest economy in the world with $3.5 trillion. We are bigger than India. But because we are so disintegrated, even India, which we are bigger than, is able to summon us with this, India Africa summit, which is unfortunate. Even Turkey, countries like Turkey, whose economy is not up to yet to $1 trillion, Our economy as Africans is 3 times that of Turkey. But Turkey summons us and we have Turkey Africa Summit. So these, some of our African leaders, they are selfish and they don't want even to talk about African unity and the aggregation of the African economy, because they want to stay in power, in positions of power, and continue to exploit their people and be well and their families at the expense of the majority of the people. So this is the problem. But these are problems, of course, which are solvable, and we have to be determined as the next generation, because we cannot allow this condition to go on as a people, as young people, as Africans. Thank you so much, Mahlet.
Thank you very much. Really, it's a pity. I don't know what it takes for us to reverse that. But of course, this platform, not only we bombard you with the historical background and what's exactly happening now, but also, a solution, to suggest a solution as a Pan-Africanist thinker, to bring that Pan-African solution, and for the citizens to take that if they are representing within any civil society organization or intellectual institution, to bring it as a policy to their government, and us also to do what we can, and sign petition, communicate those organizations, our own governments, and make sure that this very video, that this discussion somehow reach them. It's up to them to sit down and listen, but we do our job, as Kwame said, we do also the ground work. Now, without being said, so what's the way forward, Kwame?
Thank you so much, Mahlet. So the way forward, I wish I could say that go and do this immediately and things will be fixed. But you have to pay a price if you want to build a nation. The Chinese people paid a price to build their nation to the level where it is. And so we as Africans, there's no shortcut. Also, we have to pay the price. Mm-hmm. And African unity has to be in urgency. We have to pursue African unity, because this is the only solution that Nkrumah left us. That is the only solution. If we want to build an African personality, an independent African continent that is not occupied by foreign militaries, like the United States, it has more than 30 military bases, more than 36 military bases all across the continent. We have to pursue African unity in urgency. And African unity has to come as a political union, not Africa Continental Free Trade Area, these things which they have been talking about. Those are just going to delay, to delay African unity, which Nkrumah was talking about. So Pan-Africanism has to become a mainstream idea. And I want to thank my brother, actually, Hadi Yakubu of Africans Rising, who's out there, pushing the, Pan-Africanism, so that Pan-Africanism becomes a mainstream idea that contends with the neoliberalism, that contends with the socialism, with the Chinese characteristics. The Chinese have their system. So we should have our own system as Africans too. We should have Pan-Africanism. We should have Ubuntu. So Ubuntu, Pan-Africanism has to become a mainstream idea. And it takes the contribution of each and every one of us. We have to contribute with everything we have. We have to fight with everything we have. Fight with your phone, fight with your words. Everything that we have to use it to fight for the idea of African unity and Pan-Africanism, and making Pan-Africanism a standalone idea that contends with the Western system, neoliberalism, or the Western system of political economy. And he said, this is how we should run our economy as Africans. This is how we want to organize society. It has to, and we can do it together if we work together. Now, the youth, I will say it again and again, the youth are going to be the drivers, because that is where the energy is. I think it is common, the musician who said that the leaders, liberation cannot be done by one group. It takes the energy of the youth and the wisdom of the elders. So the youth have to be on the front line. That is why you see that when it comes to war, it's the youth who go to the front, and the elders are in the background, always giving advice on what to do. This is how you should hold the sword. This is how you should fight. But the youth have to be on the front. So in this struggle of making Pan-Africanism a mainstream idea, the youth have to stop watching European football and discussing European football. They have to care about the resources of our continent. The youth, you have to take care of the resources of our continent, because while you are watching European football, these people are taking our resources, the same people you are watching on TV. They have given you TVs for you to watch European football while they are taking your resources. And so our minds have to be transformed. Be ye renewed by the transforming of your mind. Be ye renewed by the transforming of your mind. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. You have to renew your mind. As a man thinketh, so the man he is. As a man thinketh, so is he. So we have to have a plan. And those plans are there. You know, we have numerous people. We have numerous people. We have numerous people, you know, with various plans. And those plans, we are working on integrating them. We have spoken to a lot of people. So we are making our own ample contribution, starting here with Connect Africa. I've spoken to you about Africans Rising. We have other institutions, Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. We have, All Africa Revolutionary Party. We have Africa Continental Unity Party. Join any of these institutions and make a contribution. Put $1, put 2 CDs, put 1,000 shillings, 50 shillings, put everything which you can. If you want the African continent to be free, we have to build it together. And we have to build it together through Pan-Africanism. Thank you so much, Mahlet.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Really, that was really, that's a fire. I just want to sink. I just want to let it sink for a moment. But of course, we have to conclude our session here, definitely, just to give a highlight on what Kwame said. As they, bombard us with their Western propaganda and Hollywood style of life. At the same time, they are teaching their youth how to come and snatch your natural resource from your own territory. And they are teaching their youth how to plunder, as Boris of the foreign minister of EU called it, plunder the jungle in Africa and make their garden beautiful in Europe or in the West. So it's up to us, to teach. That's why we are doing our part, at least by bringing that light, that information, the education, and give it a Pan-African perspective. As Kwame said, that's really nothing. I mean, we should take it seriously. Each of us can be an ambassador for this. African unity African Union is just an institution. Do not expect anything from the African Union, because the power lies actually with the individual state leaders. It's organized in that way. If the power was for the African Union, then when it was established in 1963, it could have united, as Kwame Nkrumah pushed it forward by the other side. They didn't want. They just wanted to keep their individual sovereign states. So each of us can make a change. Teach your youth, teach your children, teach your siblings, teach your family, your relatives, because they don't get such an education from their school. Let alone, people living in the diaspora. Even our own education system back in Africa fails to give credit for those great leaders of the continent, unfortunately. So we each have a responsibility to do that. If we imagine that we each and every one of us contribute to teach our youth And then, the continent do not need anyone. I mean, in 10 or 20 years, it will just be fine. Imagine full of citizens that have that Pan-African way of thinking. That's it, job done. So, but until then, we have to keep on working hard. I thank you, Kwame, again, but also I equally thank our viewers here who bear with us. And here you can see really it's a quality viewers. They were not like in and out. I watched them. They're here from the start till the end. Those kind of people that we need, because you value what we bring here onto the platform. So thank you very much. I will just give a quick shout out to Regmon Music, Honorine S, C&S, and then there was one who actually said she or he will not stay longer, but they were there for a few minutes. Sinovia Ridley, this person is always here. Also, Durba Acharya. Yeah, really shout out and thank you. So what you can do is please, as soon as this stream is over, go and share it if you find it interesting. If you find it interesting, we don't force you. Go and share the knowledge, send the video to your people. We also try to make it easier for you. We have a lot of backlog, but at least we divide it topically and make shorter video out of it. But the whole of it, it's just 1 hour and a quarter. So share it. Let the people hear this. And also, please, as soon as this stream is over, also we put out, I'm gonna pin in the comment section the petitions that we are talking about. People like Piolo Lumumba, Honorable Piolo Lumumba, have signed those petition. So please go and sign, and again share with your own network. So we will be back again on Thursday. Kwame, I'll just give you a minute if you have some concluding words.
No, thank you. I just want to thank all those who are watching today. Continue to watch the channel, continue to support the channel. And you have, I know Mahlet said we are not forcing you to share, but you have to share this because this is unbelievable. This is interesting. Apart from being educative, this is information that you cannot afford to keep for yourself. You have to share this information with other people, and you have to help this channel grow. You have to make your contribution. So that is what we are saying. Go out there, make your contribution, sign the petitions, and make the contribution. We cannot wait. I know Mahlet said, teach your children, be an ambassador, be all that, but we cannot wait anymore to make progress on behalf of Africa. We have to do it now because time is running out. Time is running out on us as Africans. So we have to do it now. So do whatever you can in supporting the movement. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a passion for us. We will always be here as much as possible, but we also want to be here as, most of the days in the week. But for that, help us to grow. And yeah, thank you. Have a blessed evening, everyone. And thank you, Kwame, once again, my brother. Bye-bye.